And we are live. Good afternoon, alienated parents, grandparents, alienated children, specialists out there, doctors, lawyers, judges, whoever's listening. Today is a good day to listen to what we have to help alienated parents worldwide understand and what everybody else needs to understand about human trafficking, child trafficking. Is our specialist today. Also with us today is the Andy Martens show
Oh no, Mary's frozen.
from Safe to our Let's Talk, Real Talk, amalgamated show with Andy Martens. Jasmine, thank you so much for coming. Andy and I are grateful to have you educate us worldwide. I'm going to get you to explain what you do, how you help parents or families, anyone worldwide, to deal with what they're going to be dealing with if you have a child or they've been through whatever in trafficking situations. And Andy and I will comment on the parent alienation part of it. Okay. So it's basically just what you know, what you deal with, and how you help people. Andy will ask you a few questions while I share this show worldwide to everyone who needs to listen to us today. So, welcome again, Jasmine. Um, Go ahead, tell us what you do at the Safe Hope Home for children, adults.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Mary, for the introduction. Yes, I'm the executive director at Safe Hope Home, which is one of Canada's only survivor-led long-term recovery programs for survivors of human trafficking. We predominantly assist individuals over the age of 15. However, there are cases that often come in where they're of a much younger age. And my main area of focus is human trafficking, and I do work with labor trafficking, but the main type of trafficking that we see is sex trafficking. And so when we think about human trafficking, it's really it has in Canada it has to involve the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some sort of labor or commercial sex act. Where someone's not necessarily willing to, but they've been coerced to do that. And so that's what we do and the work that we specialize in. But the average age of a sex trafficking survivor in Canada is 12 years old. And typically those cases are familial sex trafficking. So that's where a family member, typically a stepfather or a parent, is trafficking the children.
Wow. Wow.
Um,
What you got to say
so,
about that, Andy?
yeah, I wanted Jasmine to expand on what has led to this. Why are we having these issues of human trafficking in Canada? Let's talk Canada because all of us are in the same province of Ontario. Is it family breakdown? So we're going to try and parallel this to parental alienation. Why are we in this mess of human trafficking?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a worldwide issue, and it's very, very prevalent in Canada, North America, the United States. Yeah, it starts, I mean, for Canada, it really goes back to the history of colonization. The actual, when I do the training for the Provincial Anti-Trafficking Office, I help lead one of the trainings. We do a whole entire day to talk about this, actually, and the social determinants of health in Canada and how how it led to this issue. But we really have to go back to the history of colonization. Indigenous women and girls are 40% of Canada's trafficked people, but they only make up 5% of Canada's entire population. And so we really do have to take it back to the history of colonization and how Canada was actually named, even Canada. The name of Canada came out of the very first documented case of human trafficking in North America. And so that's where this stems from. And we see, a lot of those social determinants of health and different vulnerabilities or people being pre-groomed for this is what leads them to it. And so it pre-groomed through generational and historic trauma, or pre-groomed through like what you're talking about, parental alienation, or what we call the administrative abuse. It's a big type of abuse that we're seeing where parents are using like the systems against the other parent, and that's one of the biggest things that we see leading to kids being vulnerable to being trafficked.
So that's the same. Well, that's one parallel to parental alienation. You're seeing that vulnerability in human trafficking, and where the parent is divorced and has another boyfriend or whatnot in the relationship, and this one is providing abuse and and,
Yeah, it's exactly Jasmine was saying. She didn't hear the term parent alienation before, but you called it administration.
Administrative abuse, yeah.
Administrative abuse, exactly. And this is how families, moms and dads and grandparents, even worldwide, are getting caught up in the court abuse through it all, because we are brought back to court over and over and over to fight for our children, to the point where once the children are so brainwashed that they don't want anything to do with that loving parent. So basically these children are forced to lie, to hate, to become an abusive parent later on in life, or an abusive partner in life. They're not adapting well to society. They don't adapt well to rules. So what's to stop them from hurting another human being later on in life? And this is how the cycle replenishes on pedophilia, psychopathic tendencies out there, murders, suicides. If we kept our children raised in a loving environment, we try to outweigh the bad to keep the good in them. But when they're used in the courtrooms, and then all of a sudden the judges are taking away our loving children to make them into monsters. And this is how children fall into the trap later on in life.
Yeah. I mean, it ties back right to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the needs for the kids to have that circle of care and to build that healthy attachment. And those are the things that would set them up to not be at risk of finding themselves in trafficking situations. But when they're not able to grow up with a solid foundation, a circle of care, when they're not having their basic needs met, like security and love and secure attachment, belonging, growing up in their culture, both cultures, not just one parent's, that's where we're starting to see the gaps. And traffickers are very savvy, and they swoop in and they meet those gaps for those children. And that's how they're able to prey on them and use them for their gain and to abuse them. And it's very difficult to help someone to exit that situation and for someone to stay out. And they definitely don't come out unharmed.
Well, they don't. And a lot of us too feel, going through childhood abuse, we grow up to honor our abusers. So when we grow up, become partners to another abuser, we are trapped in that cycle of trafficking because we were set up to be caught, preyed on by an abuser. Because growing up as a child, we walked on pins and needles to praise our abusers, to get attention, to get them to like us. And this is basically how I fell into it too, in a marriage where I was forced to marry or die. And I thought I was doing good by protecting him, but then he preyed on our children the same way. And when I saw the repeated patterns of body shaming, food shaming that I went through, and he projected it onto the children as teenagers, that's what lured them in, trying to make themselves better, like I kept myself just as good for our abusers.
Yeah, and that's what we would call the grooming process, right? So it's being groomed for that cycle of abuse, and that cycle of abuse continues. And then you talked about the trauma bond, where the victim has that trauma bond, or Stockholm syndrome, sometimes we hear it called, with the abuser, and that's very there's a lot of parallels there to the abuser in human trafficking, as well as the situation that you're talking about.
Yes, you're right. So when you have a child, that 15-year-old, they're still basically children. My goodness. I mean, I still felt I was 18 and I was raped by my abuser, and I still felt like a little child, like you curl up in a ball. So I can imagine the 15-year-olds that are coming in. But how do you get them to love themselves once again and reconnect with who they really were at one time? Because a lot of these kids, a lot of us, we blamed ourselves. And it took forever to unleash that. And once we found out our abusers were not really loving people, but controlling, evil, very conniving and scheming for their own good. So how do we accept that when we're young?
Yeah. And you made an excellent point. They are children. And according to the CYFSA, the Child and Youth Family Services Act, which is legislation in Ontario, under 18, I mean, 16 to 18 is kind of a gray area, but under 18, they're a child in need of protection. And any sexual, it's sexual abuse. A child cannot consent to sexual exploitation. A child cannot consent to this. It is abuse, and they're a child in need of protection. A lot of studies have been done on children being sexually abused, and how it stunts their development, like their mental, the brain development, at the age in which they were first sexually assaulted or abused. And so that brings in a lot of things to the mix, right? When you're talking about the rehabilitative process, because now you have to take into account like the stages of development, and as well as the abuse, and this person who's completely broken down and destroyed by almost everybody in their lives, right? The systems, like the failure of the systems, the gaps in the systems, which leaves them to feeling unloved and uncared about, and just kind of plays into what the abuser says to them. And then, that lack of that healthy parent and that healthy relationship and connections to love and belonging and all those things. And then if they get looped into human trafficking, you put in that other layer of sexual abuse, and they're being forced to have sex with people, like up to hundreds of people per day. And they don't have a say in what happens or how it happens. And they're being physically beat up and mentally beat up. And so just completely destroyed in these incredibly formative years in a person's life. And so it takes years of, just stabilizing. First, you need to stabilize when you're brought to a place of safety, right? Safety is not going to feel good anymore. You're not going to understand that sense of safety, because the abuse is what's going to feel normal to you. And so it takes time to stabilize and to recognize that was not healthy and that you didn't deserve that. And then, we have like 33 courses that we work on at Safe Hope Home. And, a lot of them are self-esteem and family patterns. And you mentioned eating disorders. We talk a lot about eating disorders because almost everyone that has walked through our doors struggles with eating disorders and positive body image and self-image and healthy relationships, and codependency and addictions are a huge thing that comes into play. I'd say about 95% of the survivors that we work with struggle with addictions today. And that's not, and there's a lot of stigma around that, but we need to break that stigma because these are normal, typical, and expected responses to horrific situations, trauma being done to them. It's only natural for humans to reach for something to cope with what is happening to them. And so these children are being raped and beat and abused in so many ways that are unimaginable to most people. And so naturally they either are forced to use substances by their traffickers to be able to do what they have to get them to do, or they're reaching to substances, as a means to cope, to just survive the abuse that they're going through. And so we have to take all those things into account. And so our program, we have the 33 courses. Oftentimes they go to a detox and a rehab program first, and then they would come to us and just kind of stabilize and be in a place of safety. And that's one of the biggest comments that we get, is that they just feel safe at Safe Hope Home. And we really take pride in that. And so we kind of unpack that childhood trauma and unpack those things. And then we work with the families because we want to set them up for success when they're leaving. So reconnect them back to their loved ones who they, might have those missing connections with, and work with the families because they're not coming back as that child that they left, right? They're coming back with all that hurt and new coping mechanisms. And so it's going to be difficult for the parents. They might not even recognize them. And so learning how to work together and redevelop that healthy circle of care and relationship. And so that's a lot of what we do. And our program lasts typically about a year, but they're able to stay up to 7 years with us. And then we follow them once they leave our live-in program. We would stay connected in community and work through things with them. But it takes years. It takes a long time.
Oh, it does. It's a lifetime. I'm dealing with my own for 46 years, but it led earlier than that. It's from childhood, basically, what we deal with. And so it's a lifetime sentence of us going through the trauma daily, not just daily. I mean, complex CPTSD is living daily the abuse. Because it reoccurs all the time. But the PTSD, those triggers that set you off can really be devastating to many, especially when we get older. We have the heart failure. We have, we get brain tumors because we've been grieving so much, trying to heal and run from our abusers, or just run into a situation where you don't have to feel scared anymore is very hard. So to have the Safe Hope that you were dealing with, I mean, this is so good for people to see that there is hope. There is a place to go. I know I had 3 shelters in London, Ontario that kept me for 17 months. Until, the judge allowed me to have my money. I had no money. As a disabled mom, after coming out of prison, I had nowhere to go. But these shelters took me in. And then that's where I became an advocate to help others going through it, because false allegations, violence, sexual abuse, I mean, they were all there with children running, trying to get help. And there was no help. That was 18 years ago. So today, to have someone as young and knowledgeable as you to help these young people that have gone through it for 20, 30 years, they've got to, they need help in order to survive, because they're not surviving well. The mental health crisis is overblown. It's so bad out there that they can't keep up with all these young kids. So there's murders, suicides, shootings when they come out of it, because they had no one to go to. If we had 100,000 of you, Jasmine, out there, I think the kids would be all right. I wish I had someone to go to when I was 18, but there was nobody.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Andy, welcome back.
Yeah, it's all of these rates are going up. Canada is actually one of the worst countries in the world right now for our social economic, as for our social determinants of health. And the Attorney General's office said that it's going to take at least 28 years to close that gap. We see the increase in the suicide rates, the mental health. Things are not getting better. But like you said, things have changed significantly in the responses from the government, which is great. When I do my work with the Provincial Anti-Trafficking Office, that was a strategy. They put in a 5-year strategy. And it was this survivor champion, Jennifer Richardson, who is an incredible woman who came, they brought her from Manitoba over here to do this strategy. And so they put all this money and efforts into eradicating human trafficking. And a lot of it is the prevention. So the early intervention and prevention work for the kids. So getting human trafficking education in schools and out there. That's how Safe Hope Home was funded, was through this strategy. And there's a couple others. One in Ottawa also funded, I believe, A New Day and Voice Found, two organizations out in Ottawa. There's a few of us that exist out there that have.
But I don't think the government's doing enough, though, Jasmine, with
Yeah.
the federal government or provincial government in Canada here in Ontario.
Yeah. Well, they could always do more, but at least they're talking about it now and putting some money towards it. Because like Mary said back then, they definitely were not. So we're headed in the right direction, but it's going to take a lot more. And Mary, you mentioned a lot of things that, there should be more people like us doing the work, but it really does take a village. Like it takes everyone, like everybody needs to do their part, right? And get involved in some way, whether it's just, changing the way you talk about human trafficking. And, it's not prostitutes, it's prostituted people. It's survivors of human trafficking. It's not victims, right? And it's not child prostitutes, it's child sexual abuse, right? And so as a society, just changing the language, speaking out, advocating like you're doing, and doing these shows, like everybody needs to do their part, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, sorry, Mary, I had to take that call. I got 100 things, balls up in the air here. But so really, for human trafficking or parental alienation, Jasmine, there's the similarity is people, personality disorder, bipolar, mental health. There's things out there that people have that some people hide better than others that are leading to these issues that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, anybody with any type of vulnerability is at risk to being trafficked. So just our kids being on social media puts them at risk. Just being born a female puts you at risk. Being born Indigenous or Black puts you at risk. So there's a lot of things that put you at risk to being trafficked. It's not just mental health. But mental health does play a role in it. But like Mary said, the mental health crisis is significant, and more people are coming out with different mental health struggles, and so that is increasing their risk as well.
But certain segments, I agree, but certain people are, it's not a fair and balanced society. Some are protected better than others.
Yes. Yeah. And like we talked about when you weren't here, kids that have a home with two parents, or at least two parents that are able to co-parent together and provide those kids with that love and connection to their culture and their community and that circle of care, those kids are obviously less likely to being trafficked than those who are put in situations of parental alienation, where they're being groomed for sex trafficking or to become traffickers, quite frankly.
Right. Is Mary frozen? No, I think she's there.
I'm here.
One
I'm
more
just
question
sharing.
before I give it back to Mary. How serious is the human trafficking? Let's deal with the province of Ontario as an example.
I mean, Ontario is a hub for Canada. It has the most cases of human trafficking. I don't know the exact numbers. I believe York region, because I work a lot in York region, had over 1,700 cases last year. But I'd have to Google the stats for you to get the exact stats.
that's mind-boggling. York Region is just north of Toronto for anybody that is listening from outside of Canada. That's mind-boggling. That's really just ridiculous. Crazy numbers.
So in
That
2021, 3 provinces had rates of human trafficking that were higher than the national rate, and that was Nova Scotia 5.3, Ontario 2.3, and Saskatchewan 1.8.
wow, wow. Jasmine, the the sex of the child, does that make a big difference on them being trafficked?
Yeah, so not that males cannot be trafficked or non-gender individuals, but being born female statistically is still showing to be higher risk to being trafficked.
And the age group?
The average age of a person being entering into sex trafficking is 12 to 13 years in Canada, but majority that we're working with are 18 to 24 is what we're seeing.
Wow, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And it grows more and more each year, do you find, or is it like flatlined?
No, it's increasing, especially with social media and kids being online. It's increasing significantly.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So 66% of all of Canada's reported cases are from Ontario, and majority are we follow the 401 corridor, is a big hub, and it's Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and 95% of cases reported to police were female. So
You bring up an interesting
66.
point. Oh, sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Well, it's okay. No, I'm just shocked. 66% in Ontario. Like this is getting crazy.
yeah.
Jasmine
Wow.
brings up a good point. Maybe when I was growing up, I feel 42, but unfortunately I'm not. 50 years ago in the 70s, without the internet, is probably one reason why human trafficking wasn't an issue so much. That the internet has created a problem for this area. Am I right about that? The internet and being online is a big problem with human trafficking.
Well, it's not that it wasn't an issue back then. It's that it wasn't acknowledged properly. Also, we weren't able to be made aware of it as easily. The internet has created it to be easier for traffickers to access the children, but it's not something new that just
Well,
happened.
we talked about it before the show.
Yeah.
Somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, I can honestly say, growing up, and I mean, I went to university in Windsor and stuff, and boarding school in the early 70s, but Jeffrey Epstein was not promoted by the media that much. I mean, later on at the end, but not really. I didn't know who the heck that guy was, and he created a lot of issues as well in the
Yeah.
United States.
Yeah, so in the past, we had this view in Canada. The legislation represented and Canadians viewed folks that were being trafficked as prostitutes. So choosing to engage in sex trafficking, whether you were a child or not, we had this delinquency. Looking at the victims or the survivors who are being trafficked as the problem. Whereas now we recognize that, in fact, they are being abused by the people purchasing sex as well as the traffickers. And so now we've changed to the Nordic model when we adopted Bill C-36. And then we changed our legislation, and now we look at the survivors as survivors of human trafficking, and the perpetrators are the predators. And so I think that's why we're seeing the media coverage differently now, because in the past it was very much like delinquent, they're bad girls, let's not talk about them, they were being jailed, criminalized. And so we've changed our view on it and recognized that they are in fact being sexually abused and trafficked and needing help versus being criminals. So that's the difference. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I found in a lot of young women that would come to me, they were treated as if they were like pond scum, and yet most of them came from really good families. They just, you know, the perception they put on these young people, men and women, that they were bad kids growing up. Why were they bad kids? Because they were damaged by someone.
Yeah.
They weren't bad. They were acting out. They were seeking help. That was their way of dealing with it, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
wow, it's amazing what, you know, the world needs to know on children that are being trafficked, children that are being brainwashed, and to falling into that black hole and can't get out. They're
Well,
suffocating.
that's right, Mary. I think a similarity between human trafficking and parental alienation is the vulnerability of these kids as a result of their situation, whether it be human trafficking or parental alienation. The vulnerability, they don't have the security that these other kids have that live through a solid home and stuff like that. Am I right about that, Jasmine? Vulnerability is big with human trafficking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Kids need to grow up with two healthy parents in a loving environment and connected to their culture and their roots and their community and their faith. And by alienating them from one
Are
parent,
you still there, Jasmine?
it's harmful.
Yeah, we're still here, Mary. Mary is frozen.
We're frozen.
Well, a case in point, I have an
Um,
example of the. Oh,
we
are you
froze.
frozen, Mary?
Yeah, we
Uh-oh.
froze. I don't know if it
I'm
was on
not
your end
frozen.
too.
Can you see me okay, Jasmine?
Yeah, I can see you. It's just Mary that's frozen for me.
Okay, but a case in point where I'm not an alienated parent. I've been with my wife for a very long time. Our kids grew up in a solid home. Compare my children, I'm not comparing, I'm not being negative by this, but I'm using an example with my wife's sister's children were alienated by the youngest brother in the family. You can't compare the difference of whether it's alienation or human trafficking. People that grow up in a vulnerable home, you see the difference when these children get to be 30 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you see that every week, the differences, Jasmine.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the individuals that we've helped did not grow up in healthy two parent homes. Not there are some, but not majority.
So do you help? Do you offer some people where to a safe shelter? What exactly do you do in Toronto?
Yeah, so we have a home where it's a live-in program where the survivors can live while they're choosing to do our recovery program. It's a long, it's about 1 year that it takes them to work on their courses. And we talk about we go through things like childhood, family patterns, healthy relationships, substances, that sort of thing. Self-esteem, all those different things that led them to being vulnerable to being trafficked. Life skills. We do help them with like legal issues because a lot of them have issues like legal issues before the courts. We support them in their debts, like incurred debts through trafficking situations. We work with a lot of different partners in the community to do these things and connect them to different like community, like cultural resources and different faith-based resources for them because we are a faith-based organization. So we would connect them to whichever culture or faith that they would like to connect to, and we offer that there as well. And
can you give me some examples of debt? Oh, Mary's back now. Give us some examples of debt that they incur along the way.
Well, a lot of times traffickers will use the victims' names to get credit cards or loans or that sort of thing and put them in bad debt situations. Or maybe they'd been in school and the trafficker didn't allow them to go and then they lost that money. And so we're able to work with different individuals who are skilled in this area to help wipe the debt and work with the creditors.
So that kind of touches your feet in scamming too.
Yeah.
Like when you're sitting at the edge of a pool, you dip your feet in the water. you're dipping your feet into scamming here too, and
Yeah.
being vulnerable to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, Mary's back. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, there was that show with the domestic violence guy who was raised to scam by an abusive father. So he married to scam the money out of women, to threatening the children and all that. And you know, they it's mass produced now, all these, because kids were taken 60 years ago from a loving parent. Those are There are now becoming grandparents. Like my
Mhm.
ex-husband was taken from a father to never have one when he was just 9 months old 63 years ago. So they
Mhm.
knew the tactics on how to manipulate their partners and the children in that relationship. So these are learned behaviors. We aren't born to traffic children. We aren't born to abuse. We aren't born, unless you're a psychopath and you pass down the genes, then you have a child that, I don't know if you could tell if it's in a child, but sometimes I wonder like how some of these children become temper tantrums. Well, that's what these alienators and psychopaths do. They, you say no to them and then the punishment's worse. So a lot of the survivors as young kids, they have to abide by the abuser, trafficker, in order to survive.
Mhm.
It's a live and die situation for them, because look at all these young ones that they find buried all over wherever, thrown in woods and rivers, and that's they were
Right,
taken. The
right.
child was taken, obviously, by someone that was mentally deranged,
Yeah.
needing
A
health
really
issues.
great show that demonstrates this. It's on Prime, I believe. It's called Little Bird. It's
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
oh, it's on Crave, sorry. It's on
I
Crave,
watched
Little
it.
Bird. It really, really
I
demonstrates
watched
what
it.
you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's just
it's
some
amazing.
breaking news on CP24 on my phone now, and this illustrates what we're talking about. An Ontario man who admitted to sexually abusing children has been permitted to practice law as long as he isn't alone with the kids. The public, however, isn't allowed to know his name. Like, this is the kind of thing we're doing in Canada. That's unbelievable. You want
Mhm.
to comment on that, Jasmine, a little bit? I mean, uh, like, this is almost Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But
maybe we better leave
we
that
need to
there.
do better. We need to do
Yeah,
better.
we got to do better than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Jasmine, we're getting close to the 40-minute mark. We promised we'd try and cut our time here with you. If you still have anything else that you'd like to tell us about human trafficking, and if Andy has another question, I'd like to have him end the program with you with asking your last question here, and I'd like to ask one too. So I'll give us another 10 minutes.
Yeah. I don't
Andy?
have
Yeah.
any further remarks, but you can go ahead and ask a couple more questions.
Well, it's been the eye
Okay.
opener. And again, I just wanted to ask you, Jasmine, what is the nuts and bolts of this causing it? Because there has to be, whether it's a parental alienation or human trafficking, is it the unbalanced society that we have right now around the world? Because it wasn't supposed to be this way. I was raised that, oh, it's a happy-go-lucky world. Everybody's nice and yada, yada, yada. But the
Yeah.
older I get, I'm seeing even exposure to my neighbors here in Sault Ste. Marie. that is not the case. The more we go on in the pandemic and the affordability crisis, it's a very unstable society out there. Is that the root cause of these problems that you work on every day?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is like this question is a big one. But I think first of all, I would encourage everyone to do
Well, I
the
wanted to leave the biggest
yeah.
question till the end.
Yeah, no, and I feel like if people are able to do the province, like the provincial anti-trafficking office, their training, the sexually exploited youth and indigenous cultural competency training, I highly recommend it. It's a 6-day in-depth course where we talk about all of these issues and how we kind of got to where we are today in this situation where we find ourselves that you're asking about. And so we do that in a 6-day course. So but basically, to sum it up, I think you need to look at the history and the roots, right? Like to the beginning of colonization, like the very beginning. We have to go back to those roots and examine, how we got to where we are today. We need to understand that we got here through greed, right? And greed played a big role in everything, and this desire for more and more and more stuff. And we still live in a society today where it's just about more and more and more stuff, right? And so with the social determinants of health being the worst that they've ever been here on Turtle Island or North America, Canada, and then people wanting more and more and more stuff, and so just naturally we're going to see humans act in ways that are just beyond what we ever imagined people could do in exploiting people to a means of surviving and getting that stuff. It's the system failures, like the traffickers, the people growing up to be traffickers, like Mary said, a lot of them were isolated, alienated children. A lot of them grew up in broken systems. A lot of them were taught to abuse people. And then they fall in these cracks in these systems. And so we really need to see like system reformation and kind of go right from the top, like the government and society and go back to, look at how Indigenous individuals did community. If we got back to that sense of community where, like, I grew up in the Sioux too, Andy, so I know even growing up, there was that sense
wow,
of
cool.
yeah, and people looked out for their neighbor and they cared about their neighbor, and it wasn't like competing with their neighbor. It was just a genuine care. And now things are very different now, and it is a lot about our social economic status, the social determinants of health, and how the systems have been set up. And it's really sad, but I think you need to really go back and learn the history, and so we're not repeating it. But that's I think.
Well, when Mary sent me your name, I've heard that name somewhere before. That makes sense if you grew up in the Sioux.
I did. I grew up in the Sioux. I love the Sioux. But yeah.
But you're right. Times have changed, and the vulnerability and but human trafficking probably existed. Make my last point, and then Mary has the last word. Even in the 1940s and 1950s, 60, 70, 80 years ago, but maybe not in the way that we're seeing today in 2023.
Oh, yes, it's always existed, but it definitely has changed and evolved. Yeah.
All right, Mary, you've got the last word.
Sorry, I didn't. I guess we cut out again. Just want to say that this is a very serious issue out there, and we all need to speak out and be louder. And if there are people out there that would like to reach out to you, how would they get a hold of you, Jasmine? I know I found you on LinkedIn, and I'm glad I did, because you have been so informative today for all of us out. We don't need to go through this. Our children don't need to go through this. We need to protect our kids. Mm-hmm. And that's our number one goal, is protecting the future children.
Yeah.
And all the children that have been damaged, we need to get them help. So people out there need to understand that if you see someone that's hurting, be kind to them and ask them, why are they hurting? And maybe listen to them.
Yeah.
They will help. I know it helped me. somebody finally listened to me, and here I am.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn, or you can check out our website. It's www.safehopehome.com. And there's a connect with us. And my email is just jasmine@safehopehome.com. Thank you so much, Mary.
Perfect. Thank you,
Great. Yeah,
Jasmine.
it's a
Thank you
great
so,
show.
so
And
much. And I'd love to have you back maybe later on. And if you could give us any updates out there, more statistics or whatever, or how we could help you, we'd be great. And if we could invite you to come on to the Andy Martens show as part of a program, it would be an honor to, because we need to keep talking about this. This is not going to go away unless we do a big difference. So
Mary's like a
everyone out there,
ventriloquist now. She's talking. We got your audio, Mary, but you're frozen again.
Great. But yeah, thank you. Alienated parents, grandparents, children out there, don't give up on each other. Protect your children as much as you can. Fight for your rights, fight for your children's rights. And again, reach out to Jasmine at the Self Hope Home, Safe Hope Home, and Andy Martens. If you want to come on to the show, tell your story, help educate us in any way you can. We'd really appreciate it. And tomorrow in Toronto, Ontario, we don't have a specific place yet, but Petra Dieter from Victim to Hero will be in Toronto doing a seminar at 6 p.m. I will be there with her. So I'm going to live stream a little bit of it if I can. I'd love to have you back, Andy, if you can, tomorrow night for
Yeah,
a little
we'll
while
even
with
live
Petra.
stream from this show or my show. We'll get some of that. And that's great, Mary. I think and Jasmine, I think we've made some comparisons between parental alienation and human trafficking. I think vulnerability being a very important piece of it, why it happens in both of those situations.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for
Exactly.
having me.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you.
We'll see you
Okay.
later.
Just I'll end in